Okay, I'm gonna play a chapter from a book that was written about a trial that a famous South African professor was brought to, and this is a chapter about a summit that they did, that him and his colleagues did in regards to, health in general, but talking about how there new information has come up since the traditional high carb, low fat recommendations from health authorities, and that the world needs to change, and mainly that evidence or proof that the those guidelines in the, I believe it was late 70s and early 80s, that fat was the demon and that we needed to eat more carbs, significant amount more carbs in our diet than fat. And at that time, most health professionals knew fat as saturated fat. Not sure that they had discovered the unsaturated, polyunsaturated, or even the medium chain triglycerides, which are saturated but healthy. They just hadn't really come across, or that maybe they didn't discover that knowledge at that time. But either way, the unfounded evidence to support all those guidelines that they put out to the American public and eventually made it around the world were unfounded. So anyway, this kind of goes into that, and then some. Multiple professionals, and she describes how they're certified to stand on the stage and tell you what they're going to tell you. And it's an overview because it was a long trial, of course. But anyway, this is the essential a summit that those professionals put together to try to educate the people of that country and the world that times have changed, we know more, and that those guidelines were essentially debunked, and that they weren't very helpful, and they aren't still to this day very helpful guidelines for us to follow. But either way, this will help you make your own decision on what you should do. But either way, it's a good, helpful revisit to health guidelines based on new information. Anyway, I'll let you guys listen, and then if and when I need to jump in, add something, or feel like I need to add something, I'll just jump in and pause it.
Part 1. The Low Carb Revolution. 1. The Low Carb Summit. He that takes medicine and neglects diet wastes the time of his physician. Ancient Chinese proverb. When I flew from Johannesburg to Cape Town on 19 February 2015, I had a feeling I wasn't on just another assignment. I anticipated a scientific treat. I was off to the Cape Town International Convention Centre to cover a health summit that the organisers had billed as unique. They said it could change the world for the better, nutritionally speaking.
Oh, by the way, this is a summit about the new health guidelines that should be put out in the world, but the trial that he was on, he actually won. So if you want to learn more about the whole trial and everything, you can get this book. I'm pretty sure it's also a hard copy, but at least you can get the audiobook of it, and that's this that I'm playing now.
They had brought together from around the world 15 experts using low carbohydrate, high fat, LCHF, lifestyles to treat and prevent the life-threatening chronic diseases plaguing South Africa and the rest of the planet. Professor Tim Noakes was the...
little caveat that she is going to mention later. I don't know if I'm going to go that long, but the low carb, high fat diet that they're generally recommending here is a diet, and a lot of people have heard of basically touting the keto diet as an extreme form of the low-carb, high-fat. And so take it with a grain of salt for now, but if you've heard anything about the keto diet and you thought it was negative, if you heard negative things about it, it's probably unlikely, but if you have, that is apparently an extreme form of this low-carb, high-fat. Just perspective.
Conference host. The organizer and visionary was beautiful South African former model Karen Thompson. Thompson is the best-selling author of Sugar Free, 8 Weeks to Freedom from Sugar, put together for position. Ancient Chinese proverb. When I flew from Johannesburg to Cape Town on 19 February 2015, I had a feeling I wasn't on just another assignment. I anticipated a scientific treat. I was off to the Cape Town International Convention Centre to cover a health summit that the organisers had billed as unique. They said it could change the world for the better, nutritionally speaking. They had brought together from around the world 15 experts using low-carbohydrate, high-fat, LCHF, lifestyles to treat and prevent the life-threatening chronic diseases plaguing South Africa and the rest of the planet. Professor Tim Noakes was the conference host. The organizer and visionary was beautiful South African former model Karen Thompson. Thompson is the best-selling author of Sugar Free, 8 Weeks to Freedom from Sugar and Carb Addictions, and granddaughter of the late South African heart transplant pioneer, Professor Christian Barnard. It was Barnard and his team's actions that first inspired Noakes to become a medical doctor. Thompson first heard Noakes speak about sugar and addiction in the same breath in a TV documentary in 2014. Before then, she had no idea that there was such a thing as sugar addiction. Many doctors and dietitians wedded to conventional nutrition wisdom insist that there isn't. Thompson instantly realized that she had a sugar habit and wanted to quit it for good. She contacted Noakes about opening a sugar addiction center, and the two bonded instantly. Thus, she began her LCHF journey with Noakes as her guide and mentor. He inspired her to write the book and develop the Healthy Eating and Lifestyle Program in 2012. HELP was the first of its kind in the world, a 21-day inpatient program that treats sugar and carbohydrates as an addiction using an LCHF nutrition approach. But the real driver behind the Cape Town LCHF summit was Thompson's distress and growing fury at the venomous personal and professional attacks on Noakes in the media. The feeding frenzy had grown more intense in the wake of the announcement that the Health Professions Council of South Africa, HPCSA, intended hauling him in for a disciplinary hearing. The HPCSA had charged Noakes with unprofessional conduct for his February 2014 tweet to a breastfeeding mother in which he advised weaning babies onto LCHF foods. The public attacks on Noakes brought back painful memories for Thompson. I knew what it was like to grow up in a famous family and have total strangers take swipes at us in the media, she told me. When I was 10, a newspaper published an interview in which the reporter said awful things about my grandfather. It upset me deeply. I never forgot it. It's not right that people can just say these things about someone and the media publish them to sell more newspapers and get more visitors to their websites. Thompson wanted to counter the attacks on Noakes. What better weapon, she thought, than good science? Her vision started out small, a one-day seminar and a few experts from abroad to speak up for Noakes by presenting the scientific evidence, LCHF. To this end, she invited the two men widely acknowledged as the fathers of the LCHF movement in the US, Professor Stephen Finney and Dr. Eric Westman. She also invited Canadian physician Dr. Jay Wortman and American LCHF blogger Jimmy Moore, all immediately accepted. From there, Thompson's vision took on a life of its own. She and Noakes invited other LCHF international experts. Australian doctors, among them Low Carb Down Under co-founder Dr. Rod Taylor, got to hear about the meeting and expressed a desire to attend. Low Carb Down Under had invited Noakes to speak in Melbourne, Australia in 2014. His reception there was positive and in stark contrast to the attacks back home. The stellar list of speakers that Noakes and Thompson eventually assembled included internationally renowned medical doctors, scientists and researchers. Among the medical doctors were a cardiologist, a nephrologist, a psychiatrist, a bariatric surgeon and an orthopedic surgeon. All said they would come, many at their own expense, to show support for Noakes and to spread the word about the growing evidence for the safety and efficacy of LCHF diets. The only invited expert who couldn't attend was Nina Teicholz, US author of The Big Fat Surprise, Why Butter, Meat and Cheese Belong in a Healthy Diet. Her invitation arrived just a few hours after she had committed to another event. She told Noakes and Thompson that she would be there in spirit. At a dinner in Cape Town one night, Noakes met former owner and CEO of the Fleet Feet franchise in the US, Tom Rayner. Rayner leaned over and asked, "If there was one additional person you would like to have at your summit, who would that be?" Without hesitation, Noakes replied, "That's easy, Gary Taubes." Taubes is an American science writer and author of bestsellers such as Good Calories, Bad Calories, Why We Get Fat and What to Do About It, and The Case Against Sugar. Rayner responded, "You have your wish. I will fund his attendance at your meeting." Response to the conference was positive and exceeded even Thompson's expectations. The growing list of speakers and delegates wanting to attend required a venue change. She chose the Cape Town International Convention Centre. Noakes worried about how they would finance the conference. He had visions of them both ending up seriously out of pocket, if not impoverished. Thompson is a glass-half-full kind of person. She had no such reservations. She gave Noakes what he called a Barnard.
A little bit more noise than I was expecting on my walk.
Response. "Prof, you are always telling everyone to believe in the outcome," she told him. "So you should just follow your own advice. Believe in the outcome. It will happen." And happen it did. Thompson and Noakes managed a coup of sorts. They secured significant financial support from the country's top international investment, savings, insurance and banking group, Old Mutual. Old Mutual was an inspired choice of partner for the venture. It ensured that the summit avoided compromising ties with Big Food and Big Pharma or any vested interest on either side of the divisive nutrition debate. Old Mutual Chief Medical Officer Dr. Peter Bond was keenly aware of the risk the company was taking. From the outset, the conference was a clear and direct challenge to orthodoxy and the powerful vested interests behind conventional nutrition wisdom. Bond therefore chose his words very carefully in his opening address to the conference. Old Mutual was not endorsing a particular diet or way of eating, he said. The company was simply acknowledging that health crises around the world, including in South Africa, showed that new approaches are necessary. There was a need to elevate preventative medicine to the level it deserved, and not only to do it, but more importantly, also have the desire to do it. "We have clearly failed to date," Bond said. He presciently added, "We believe that when you get the right critical mass behind the topic, you can make big changes and difference. Part of the reason this conference is taking place is the contribution towards a critical mass behind preventative measures, which will alter the course of serious, non-communicable diseases, NCDs, that affect people in this country." Old Mutual Executive General Manager Marwan Abrahams was more direct. "We are extremely proud to be associated with this conference and to have the caliber of thought leaders that we have in this room today." With so many speakers, Thompson extended the conference program to 4 days, 3 for health professionals, the 4th and final day for the lay public. She easily secured 19 continuing professional development (CPD) points from the South African Medical Association (SAMA) for conference attendees. All doctors, dietitians and related healthcare practitioners must register with the HPCSA in order to practice in South Africa. The HPCSA requires its members to update their professional knowledge and skills each year. Healthcare practitioners are required to accumulate 30 CPD points annually. It wasn't long before around 600 people had registered. More than 400 of them were health professionals, local and some foreign medical doctors, dentists, dietitians, nutritionists, psychologists, and complementary medicine practitioners. But the conference nearly didn't happen. 9 days before the scheduled opening on 19 February 2015, SAMA withdrew the CPD points.
Wait for it. There's a slightly long intro. Should be coming up pretty soon when they get into the interviews.
After a group of ADSA dietitians objected. They claimed that there was no evidence for the safety or efficacy of LCHF diets. The irony, of course, was that evidence was there, and was exactly what the summit would provide for the first time on a global platform in South Africa. Without CPD points, many of the 400 health professionals would no longer be willing or able to attend the event. Thompson and Noakes faced the prospect of the summit's imminent collapse with all the financial implications. The dietitians did not anticipate Thompson's fighting spirit. Through her lawyer, she informed SAMA that its withdrawal of the CPD points was irrational, unlawful, and forced to be set aside as an unjust administrative action. She noted that an SAMA official had confirmed in writing that she could market the conference as one for which CPD credits would be available. She threatened to apply for an immediate, urgent injunction from the High Court for reinstatement of the CPD points. SAMA was clearly not an unbiased party in this case. On the contrary, it was riddled with conflicts of interest in bias against Noakes and LCHF. Its members and presidents would participate in the HPCSA's preliminary committee of inquiry that had made the decision to charge Noakes over his tweet. SAMA wisely backed down, reinstating the CPD points and even granting 2 more, making it 21. In trying to sabotage the conference, the dietitians had helped Thompson to make the CPD points even more attractive to professional participants. It was the first of many lessons in unintended consequences for the dietitians and other die-hard opponents of Noakes and LCHF. In the build-up to the summit, Thompson issued an open invitation to all Noakes' critics to attend for free and debate the science with him and other experts.
I really like that they invited anyone that would counter his argument. That's healthy. If they didn't do that, it would be a different story. So, good to hear that.
She offered to cover the travel costs of those who felt they could not afford it. Among those she invited were the authors of the UCT Cardiologists and Academics letters published in 2012 and 2014 respectively. Thompson also invited Stradom. None accepted the invitation, coming up with a variety of excuses. The blanket avoidance of public debate took on a coordinated air. With little preamble, the conference began, and speakers embarked on the ritual slaughter of sacred nutrition cows. Chief among these were official low-fat, high-carb, LFHC, dietary guidelines, and alternative theories on the causes and best methods for treatment and prevention of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and many other NCDs, also called lifestyle diseases, that are now epidemic across the globe. Speakers showed how these diseases would be better described as nutritional diseases, are just the tip of the iceberg, and that underneath them all lies insulin resistance, IR. They also demonstrated the role that a high-carb diet plays in laying the groundwork for IR to develop in susceptible individuals. Another focus was the diet-heart hypothesis that saturated fat causes heart disease. Yet another was the calories in, calories out, CICO model of obesity, which holds that people are fat because they eat too much and move too little. The diet-heart hypothesis and CICO are the pillars on which the influential official Dietary Guidelines for Americans rest. The guidelines were another major focus of the conference. In particular, speakers looked at the available science, or rather lack thereof, when the US introduced the guidelines in 1977, and the rest of the...
That was the guideline for a high-carb, low-fat diet, essentially.
English-speaking world followed shortly thereafter. Gary Taubes dissected CICO and revealed its terminal flaws in his presentation titled Why We Get Fat, Adiposity 101, and the Alternative Hypothesis of Obesity. He argued that the global epidemics of obesity and diabetes were not caused by people eating too much and moving too little, or human weaknesses such as ignorance or indulgence. He called CICO the original sin of obesity research and the biblical equivalent of greed and sloth. Taubes said that research now shows that the key driver of obesity is hormonal imbalance. In particular, science has identified dietary carbohydrates that drive insulin, which in turn drives fat. Swedish physician...
Carbohydrates drive up the sugars in your body, essentially, right? And fats in general tend to buffer the carbohydrate spikes, the blood sugar spikes. Just some little side info that would be healthy to research.
Dr. Andreas Ehrenfeldt, Sweden's diet doctor, was equally critical of CICO. Ehrenfeldt is the visionary behind Sweden's biggest and fastest-growing health blog, DietDoctor.com. He is also the author of Low-Carb, High-Fat Food Revolution, Advice and Recipes to Improve Your Health and Reduce Your Weight. After 8 years of successfully treating obese and diabetic patients with LCHF diets, Ehrenfeldt quit his medical practice in 2015 to run his website in the hopes that by reaching more people, he could change the status quo.
Just got to pause here just to reflect on this idea that in the past, we've all been told essentially that fat makes you fat. And what he's literally saying here is that fat doesn't make you fat. In fact, it makes you lose weight. Essentially, the right fats make you lose weight. The wrong fats, for the most part, saturated fats, actually do the opposite. They deteriorate your health and cause health problems. So healthy fats make you healthy, unhealthy fats make you less healthy. So to be this idea that all fat is bad and all fat makes you bad or unhealthy and all fat makes you gain weight is kind of a lie that a lot of us, not a lie, it's just old information, let's say, that a lot of us still think about when we think of fat. And that's the sad part, is that there was so much programming back in the late 70s and 80s, and on from there, that just made us not want to eat fat, or just low fat, of course, but that's low saturated fat typically that we're doing. We're getting low saturated fat, and we're not getting enough of the healthy fat, unsaturated fats like olive oil, walnuts, avocados, avocado oil. There's a lot of nuts that have good healthy fat in them. Most any plant-based oil, I shouldn't say that, no, not true. But the healthier fats tend to be from plants, not animals. Anyway, I'll let this go, back it up a little bit.
Sweden's biggest and fastest growing health blog, DietDoctor.com. He is also the author of Low Carb, High Fat Food Revolution, advice and recipes to improve your health and reduce your weight. After 8 years of successfully treating obese and diabetic patients with LCHF diets, Ehrenfeld quit his medical practice in 2015 to run his website in the hopes that by reaching more people, he could change the status quo. To stay free from advertisements, product sales and industry sponsorship, his blog is fully funded by the public via an optional membership. Ehrenfeld told the conference that CICO is like saying,
that's super important. When it's crowdfunded, essentially, there's no real conflict of interest. Really hard to have a big company paying for something, sponsoring you, so to speak, encouraging you to say a certain thing that helps them. It's really hard for that to happen when it's crowdfunded.
a Homer Simpson virus has spontaneously spread across the world.
I'm going to back it up
It doesn't make sense. Ehrenfeld quit his medical practice in 2015 to run his website in the hopes that by reaching more people, he could change the status quo. To stay free from advertisements, product sales and industry sponsorship, his blog is fully funded by the public via an optional membership. Ehrenfeld told the conference that CICO is like saying a Homer Simpson virus has spontaneously spread across the world. It doesn't make sense to say that people have suddenly become lazy gluttons, he said. CICO is little more than marketing, Ehrenfeld told the conference. It's what the junk food industry wants us to believe. They spend billions of dollars trying to convince you of that because it absolves them and their products of any guilt in causing the obesity epidemic, Ehrenfeld said. For proof of that, conference speakers showed how you just have to look at what food and drink companies get up to. For example, in the US, Coca-Cola, Pepsi and Kellogg's have all sponsored the country's largest association of nutrition professionals, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, AND. In Canada, Coca-Cola sponsored Ontario's 2012 Healthy Kids Strategy, the goal of which was to reduce childhood obesity by 20% over 5 years. In 2016, the AP, Associated Press, revealed how the sugar industry bought off top scientists and funded millions of dollars worth of research to downplay the link between sugary beverages and obesity. The industry used its massive financial muscle to demonize fat. Coca-Cola followed suit and has continued to promote the idea that provided people exercise enough, they can eat and drink whatever they like, including sugar-sweetened beverages, as a New York Times report showed. US physician Eric Westman got straight to the point at the start of the second conference day with a presentation titled LCHF Treatment of Obesity.
At that time, no one would have ever thought that a high carb, high sugar, high carb drink like Coke, would ever lead to weight gain. And they didn't associate high carb intake with that. But biologically speaking, it's pretty much what happens. So, you have kids in America that are drinking. I came across a guy one time that said he drank a 2-liter bottle of Dr. Pepper pretty much every day. And he wondered why he had such horrible health conditions. Anyway, carrying on. I'm going to back it up again about 30 seconds like I have been to keep us on track.
The industry used its massive financial muscle to demonize fat. Coca-Cola followed suit and has continued to promote the idea that provided people exercise enough, they can eat and drink whatever they like, including sugar-sweetened beverages, as a New York Times report showed. US physician Eric Westman got straight to the point at the start of the second conference day with a presentation titled LCHF Treatment of Obesity and Metabolic Syndrome. As an academic and associate professor of medicine at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, Westman is at the coalface of the fight against obesity and related diseases. His research interest is disease prevention. Because smoking and obesity are the major causes of morbidity and mortality in modern society, his research involves clinical trials of new therapies for smoking cessation and obesity. He also runs a weight loss clinic at Duke. In his extensive research, Westman has described the clinical use of LCHF for the treatment and prevention of both obesity and metabolic syndrome. Westman said that people are always demanding to see the science for LCHF eating, yet the evidence is in plain sight. It is not hard to get this information, he said. It's out there. He presented significant evidence from clinical trials demonstrating the efficacy of LCHF diets compared to Mediterranean-style low-fat and low-GI diets. One of the best studies at the time to support LCHF diets was the Israeli-led multi-year DIRECT study, published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2008, which showed improvements in carotid thickness, a measure of atherosclerosis, on an LCHF diet.
That is a hugely important fact, that an LCHF diet reduces atherosclerosis, basically heart disease, essentially.
Westman also referred to a comparison of 4 diets, Atkins Low Carb, Zone, Weight Watchers and Ornish, published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, in 2005. It showed that Atkins achieved the most weight loss at 6 and 12 months. Westman's second presentation on the final day of the conference was titled Practical Implementation of a Low-Carb Diet. While less scientific and more entertaining, it was just as compelling and informative. Donning a white coat and addressing the members of the audience as if they were obese patients, he took them step by step through the basics of LCHF for weight loss and maintenance thereafter. His message was as simple. For long-term health and weight control, a conscious reduction in carbohydrate intake is essential. He also made the case for real food, asking the audience, "Have you ever seen a bread or pasta tree?" He made it clear that he is no fan of fruit because of its high sugar, fructose.
Have you ever seen a bread or pasta tree? That's pretty important because a lot of the carbs that the traditional American diet consumer eats is breads and carbs, and breads and pasta, let's say, right? Not the only things, obviously, but those things have zero fiber in them. And one of the best benefits to like real food, which is like fruit and vegetables or whatever, right, is that they have some fiber in them. And fiber is great for your digestive system and your gut health. So, yeah, maybe had they recommended, healthy carbs when they made that recommendation back in the 80s, if they had recommended more of the healthy carbs, that would have been a different story. But a lot of it is processed carbs that are devoid of healthy fiber, which is essential for gut health. Just thought I'd add that.
Content. Fruit, Westman said, is nature's candy. Canadian
Again, fruit is nature's candy, but it also has a good amount of fiber. So it's a balance of low glycemic fruit, which is low sugar fruit like apples, and I believe celery, I don't know, fruits and vegetables that are low sugar but high in fiber. Obviously more healthy.
Nephrologist, kidney specialist, Dr. Jason Fung, focused on another conference theme: why so many doctors and dietitians still claim that diabetes is necessarily a chronic, degenerative, irreversible, and ultimately incurable disease. Fung used...
I'm going to back it up just a little bit once again, just to kind of keep us on track.
Tree. He made it clear that he is no fan of fruit because of its high sugar, fructose content. Fruit, Westman said, is nature's candy. Canadian nephrologist, kidney specialist, Dr. Jason Fung, focused on another conference theme: why so many doctors and dietitians still claim that diabetes is necessarily a chronic, degenerative, irreversible, and ultimately incurable disease. Fung used to believe that. The driver for change was his own frustration after 10 years of religiously adhering to orthodox treatment protocols for his diabetic patients.
Decades old orthodox treatment protocols. That's a very key distinction.
When he looked back, Fung told the audience, he realized that he had not helped his patients much. He had just made them fatter, sicker, and more reliant on drugs. Fung started researching alternatives. He came across evidence on the role of insulin and IR in diabetes that flatly contradicted his beliefs. He changed his mind to accommodate the evidence. He began advising his diabetic patients to ditch the conventional low-fat, high-carbohydrate dietary advice and try LCHF. Fung said that he was amazed by the results. In most cases, his patients showed a significant reduction in symptoms. Better still, some patients were able to do without medication altogether. Thus, Fung began his presentation by asking how resistance develops in a biochemical system. After all, the body is naturally designed to function properly, so why does it sometimes become unable to fend off resistance? He told the audience that just as taking antibiotics is the precursor to developing antibiotic resistance, so insulin is the precursor to IR. He said that there are two big lies in the treatment of type 2 diabetes mellitus, T2DM. The first is that T2DM is a chronic, progressive disease that can't be cured. The second is that lowering blood sugar is the primary goal. The truth, Fung said, is that diabetes is a curable, or at the very least, reversible dietary disease. Fung took the audience down the intriguing new path of the insulin theory of obesity, documented in his book, The Obesity Code: Unlocking the Secrets of Weight Loss. He painted a chilling picture of a vicious cycle.
That happens to be a very highly rated book that I would recommend you read if you're intrigued by this.
In which insulin drives IR, that in turn drives obesity. He explained that...
I'm going to back it up so you can hear that again.
The truth, Fung said, is that diabetes is a curable, or at the very least, reversible dietary disease. Fung took the audience down the intriguing new path of the insulin theory of obesity, documented in his book, The Obesity Code: Unlocking the Secrets of Weight Loss. He painted a chilling picture of a vicious cycle in which insulin drives IR, that in turn drives obesity. He explained that obesity is not the cause of diabetes. Rather, it is excessive insulin levels over time that causes both obesity and T2DM. And the cause of all that insulin? Not just carbohydrates, Fung said, but also bad dietary advice to the general public, and especially to diabetics, that prescribes grazing on carbohydrates. British obesity researcher and speaker Dr. Zoe Harcombe caused much mirth in her presentation when she said, "Don't graze unless you are a cow or want to be the size of one." Insulin resistance quickly became a leitmotif at the conference. Speaker after speaker explained why doctors, dietitians and patients should all take IR seriously. They emphasized that high-carbohydrate diets increase the likelihood of IR developing. Noakes, for example, argued that ignoring IR undermines the practice of chronic medicine. If all the conditions attached to IR are linked to nutrition, as he believes they are, then patients don't need drugs. Obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and many other life-threatening conditions are not caused by a lack of pharmaceutical drugs, he said. They are caused by too many carbohydrates in the diet. We fuel the fire with carbohydrates and try to put it out with pharmacologic drugs that don't work.
So essentially what he's saying is that by reducing our carbohydrates, we are improving our health overall. That's it. Doesn't have to be complicated.
Speakers focused on the urgent need for a revision of the dietary guidelines that favour low-fat, high-carb foods. Harcombe presented the results of her research for her PhD, a meta-analysis of the evidence for dietary guidelines in the US and the UK. The timing...
I'm going to go back to what I just said and caveat that with just reducing carbs is not the answer. Of course, you're going to increase your fats and your proteins to compensate. You still generally need the same amount of calories, but you want the calories from a healthier source. And in the area of fat, obviously from the healthier fats like the unsaturated fats, omega-3s and 6s and stuff, the PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids. Backing it up, playing it back.
They're caused by too many carbohydrates in the diet. We fuel the fire with carbohydrates and try to put it out with pharmacologic drugs that don't work. Other speakers focused on the urgent need for a revision of the dietary guidelines that favour low-fat, high-carb foods. Harcombe presented the results of her research for her PhD, a meta-analysis of the evidence for dietary guidelines in the US and the UK. The timing couldn't have been better. Open Heart had published her first paper on the topic a week before the summit. Harcombe's conclusion? There was no evidence from randomized controlled trials, RCTs, the supposed gold standard of scientific research, to support the official dietary guidelines when the US and the UK introduced them in 1977 and 1983 respectively. The official guidelines affected the health of more than 270 million people at the time, said Harcombe. That number is likely to have risen to billions in the interim, she concluded. British consultant...
I'm going to play that back because it's so important to know and be aware of. I'm going to go back about, 30 seconds, maybe a minute, just to make sure we can hear that again.
Other speakers focused on the urgent need for a revision of the dietary guidelines that favour low-fat, high-carb foods. Harcombe presented the results of her research for her PhD, a meta-analysis of the evidence for dietary guidelines in the US and the UK. The timing couldn't have been better. Open Heart had published her first paper on the topic a week before the summit. Harcombe's conclusion? There was no evidence from randomized controlled trials, RCTs, the supposed gold standard of scientific research, to support the official dietary guidelines when the US and the UK introduced them in 1977 and 1983 respectively. The official guidelines affected the health of more than 270 million people at the time, said Harcombe. That number is...
No evidence, but the advertising and the promotion of that way of eating affected 270 some odd million people, right? At least that. Continuing.
Likely to have risen to billions in the interim, she concluded. British consultant cardiologist Dr. Aseem Malhotra also took broad aim at the guidelines and the diet-heart hypothesis. Malhotra is science director of Action on Sugar, a group in the UK comprising respected scientists and doctors who campaign to reduce the public sugar consumption and raise awareness of the ubiquitous presence of sugar in many processed foods. Malhotra spoke eloquently of the dangers of too much medicine and identified basic conditions necessary for efficient healthcare to exist. These demand that both doctors and patients are informed, he said. He referred to the 7 sins that contribute to a lack of knowledge on both sides. These sins include biased funding of research, i.e. research funded because it is likely to be profitable, not because it will be beneficial to patients, financial conflicts of interest, a culture of defensive medicine, and a corresponding attitude that more treatment is better. He also spoke about the benefits of a Mediterranean diet, but only if it is high in healthy fats and low in sugar and other refined processed carbohydrates. Malhotra is author of the recently published bestseller.
I like that caveat to the Mediterranean diet, so I'm going to play that back because I think it's important. I think it's essential.
Research funded because it is likely to be profitable, not because it will be beneficial to patients. Financial conflicts of interest, a culture of defensive medicine, and a corresponding attitude that more treatment is better. He also spoke about the benefits of a Mediterranean diet, but only if it is high in healthy fats and low in sugar and other refined processed carbohydrates. Malhotra is author of the recently published bestseller, The Piopi Diet, a 21-day lifestyle plan. Malhotra's co-author of that book is Irish independent documentary filmmaker Donal O'Neill. O'Neill is a former international track and field athlete with a passion for health and human performance that resonates through his films. He and Malhotra made The Big Fat Fix movie that premiered in 2016. Noakes hailed it at the time as the best health movie ever. A summit sub-theme around the diet-heart hypothesis was the overuse and abuse of cholesterol-lowering drugs known as statins. Noakes is also not a fan of statins. He has called them the single most ineffective drug ever invented. Another vocal statin critic at the summit was US family physician Dr. Jeffrey Gerber, Denver's diet doctor. He gave a lively presentation titled Cholesterol OMG. He used the catchy title, he said, to make people realize that there are some issues related to the non-standard LCHF diet and concerns about cholesterol, cardiovascular risk and health. Traditionally, dating back even to the days of Dr. Robert Atkins, doctors tried to scare people off low-carb diets and onto statins by saying that their levels of low-density lipoprotein, LDL, the so-called bad cholesterol, would go up, Gerber said. The idea was that Atkins and similar diets would clog the arteries and cause fatal heart attacks and strokes. Gerber predicted that statins had passed their sell-by date. Despite being the most prescribed drug on the planet, they would probably be gone in 10 years, he said. The conference also heard about the benefits of fat adaptation, using fat instead of glucose for fuel, from the horse's mouth. Prof. Stephen Phinney, American physician-scientist and emeritus professor of medicine at the University of California, Davis. Phinney is co-founder and chief medical officer of the visionary Virta Health in the US. Virta is the first clinically proven treatment to safely and sustainably reverse type 2 diabetes without medications or surgery. One of Phinney's presentations covered the benefits of fat adaptation and nutritional ketosis for sports performance and overall health. Much of his presentation was taken from his book, The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Performance, co-authored with Professor Jeff Volek. Phinney coined the term nutritional ketosis 30 years ago. He did so, he said, because of confusion and fear around ketones, ketosis induced by dietary carbohydrate restriction, nutritional ketosis, and ketosis caused by an absence of insulin, a condition known as ketoacidosis, which can be fatal. He explained why many doctors and dietitians are fearful of ketosis and ketones and instill this unnecessary fear and anxiety in their patients. It's all down to ignorance, Phinney said. Doctors and dietitians are still classically taught that ketones are toxic byproducts of fat metabolism. That can be true, but only in the case of extremely high levels of ketones coupled with a complete absence of insulin, he said. In that case, it is ketoacidosis, which occurs in type 1 diabetics and more rarely in end-stage type 2 diabetics. For the rest, Phinney showed why ketosis is an essential, normal, and benign bodily state. Intriguing insight into the addictive properties of sugar and other carbohydrate foods came from South African-born, US-based adult and pediatric bariatric surgeon Dr. Robert Sivers. Sivers pointed to a disturbing health pattern. 60 years ago, experts were wringing their hands about the rise in lung cancer, heart disease, and emphysema. They ignored and argued against the evidence that tobacco was the culprit. Today, they sit wringing their hands about obesity, diabetes, cholesterol, and hypertension, while ignoring what Sivers called the culprit drugs. The most prevalent chronic NCDs killing us as a species are a consequence of drugs not well tolerated by human systems, Sivers said. These drugs are alcohol, tobacco, and the obesogenic drug, carbohydrates. One of the many strengths of the Low Carb Summit was that speakers often spoke personally and from the heart. Canadian physician Jay Wortman is a public health specialist and clinical assistant professor at the University of British Columbia's Faculty of Medicine. His research featured in the hit Canadian Broadcasting Corporation news documentary, My Big Fat Diet. Wortman told the summit how he reversed his own type 2 diabetes in 2002 by going on an LCHF diet while waiting for advice from his orthodox peers on what medication to take. He has been free of all symptoms of the condition ever since. He also addressed concerns about the safety of LCHF regimens for children and pregnant women, saying that his extensive research into traditional diets shows that there are no safety issues. Australian nutrition therapist Christine Kronar told how she lost weight and eliminated serious health issues on an LCHF diet. She dispelled many myths that still exist about the LCHF lifestyle. US psychiatrist Dr. Ann Childers told how she developed metabolic syndrome and subsequently reversed all her symptoms by going on a ketogenic diet, an extreme form of LCHF. Childers, a US Air Force veteran, explained that metabolic syndrome is an umbrella syndrome that encompasses a cluster of problems. These include heart disease, lipid, blood fat problems, hypertension, T2DM, dementia, cancer, polycystic ovary syndrome, and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, NAFLD. As an adult and child psychiatrist, Childers has a special interest in nutrition and mental health. She has researched the effects of nutrient-poor, high-carbohydrate diets, as well as high-grain diets through the ages. These foods...
Nutrient-poor, high-carbohydrate. You could say, in other words, something like breads and pasta versus fruits and vegetables. Maybe think about that for a second.
Foods don't just contribute to weight gain, Childers told the conference. They are also not good for body or brain. And despite what many dietitians still believe and teach, Childers said, fats, including saturated fats, are the brain's best foods, not carbohydrates. She also criticized food companies for changing health patterns with their processed foods. The bottom line is their obligation to their stockholders, she said. They do what they need to do to make a profit. They embed themselves in nutrition organizations.
A recent saturated fat, which is known to be the worst fat for you, that's been, I wouldn't say mostly debunked, but pretty debunked, is coconut oil. It has medium chain triglycerides that are apparently very healthy fats. So there are some saturated fats that are actually good for you. So, I mean, just what they're kind of pointing to is that fat in general, it is good for you, but it's the percentages of saturated versus unsaturated fat is that something that we all could benefit from knowing. Yeah. Because obviously, probably if you have too much of the unhealthy saturated fat, you're going to have some problems too. Just as you would have problems on a high carb, low saturated fat diet. It's problem in the other direction, so to speak.
American physician Dr. Michael Eads has practiced bariatric, nutritional, and metabolic medicine since
Again, I'm going to back up just to catch up.
Are the brain's best foods, not carbohydrates. She also criticized food companies for changing health patterns with their processed foods. The bottom line is their obligation to their stockholders, she said. They do what they need to do to make a profit. They embed themselves in nutrition organizations. American physician Dr. Michael Eads has practiced bariatric, nutritional, and metabolic medicine since 1986. In his presentation, he gave evidence from his book Protein Power and other research showing how studies biased against saturated fat worked their way into government recommendations. Eads joined Childers in looking at LCHF from an evolution.
I haven't read that book, but it's pretty highly rated, Protein Power. That would be helpful, perhaps, to help differentiate the difference between the different types of saturated fats and the unsaturated fats that would be healthy. And why, if it's a saturated fat and it's good for you, why is it good for you? So it might be a good read.
Perspective. He recalled how he had first been alerted to the dangers of the conventional LFHC diet. That was when he came across research medicine since 1986.
Backing up.
In his presentation, he gave evidence from his book Protein Power and other research showing how studies biased against saturated fat worked their way into government recommendations. Eads joined Childers in looking at LCHF from an evolutionary perspective. He recalled how he had first been alerted to the dangers of the conventional LFHC diet. That was when he came across research showing that the ancient Egyptians, the first population to attempt this diet between 2500 BC and AD 395, were anything but healthy. the fondness of Egyptians for bread was so well known that they were nicknamed artophagoi, or eaters of bread, Eads said. Their diet consisted primarily of bread, cereals, fresh fruit, vegetables, some fish and poultry, almost no red meat, olive oil instead of lard, and goat's milk for drinking and to make into cheese. Eads called these foods a veritable modern nutritionist's nirvana. If these foods were so healthy, then the ancient Egyptians should have lived forever, or at least should have lived long, healthy lives and died of old age in their beds, he said. But did they? On the contrary, Eads found an Egyptian populace rife with disabling dental problems, fat bellies and crippling heart disease. Sounds a lot like the afflictions of millions of people in America today, doesn't it? The Egyptians did not eat much fat or refined carbohydrate. They ate almost nothing but whole grains, fresh fruit and vegetables, fish and fowl. Yet they suffered from the same diseases that afflict modern man. The same modern man, Eads said, who doctors and dietitians advised to eat lots of whole grains, fresh fruits and vegetables to prevent or reverse these diseases. Australian orthopaedic surgeon Dr. Gary Fettke gave one of the most exciting and controversial presentations to the conference on cancer and nutrition. Fettke is a cancer survivor and another who has paid a heavy price for daring to go against nutrition orthodoxy. In 2016, the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency, AHPRA, did something extraordinary. It banned Fettke for life from talking to his patients about sugar. That was after a dietitian complained about the dietary advice he was giving to his patients with obesity and T2DM to reduce their intake of sugar and other carbohydrates, and by so doing significantly reduce their risk of limb loss. Fettke prefers not to have to amputate patients' limbs. He would much rather help his patients save their limbs and lives. He was excited by research showing that LCHF diets could do just that. Interestingly, in September 2018, AHPRA suddenly did a complete about-turn. It exonerated Fettke completely of any wrongdoing and apologized to him in writing. In his presentation titled, "So You Think You Need Sugar? Your cancer needs it even more," Fettke looked at the science behind the metabolic model of cancer therapy, which is based on the work of Nobel Prize-winning German biochemist Dr. Otto Warburg in the 1930s. Fettke presented research suggesting that dietary intervention, in particular a ketogenic diet, is the cancer treatment of the future. One of the strengths of the summit was that it included a lay speaker. Jimmy Moore runs the hugely successful Livin' La Vida Low Carb blog. In his presentation, he described his momentous decision in January 2004 to lose the weight that was literally killing him. At age 32 and weighing 410 pounds, 185 kilograms, he began eating LCHF. Within a year, he had lost 180 pounds, 82 kilograms, shrunk his
180-pound loss from eating more fat and less carbs. That should land. It should at least get us all to rethink what we've heard and do some research, because that alone, the metabolic disease, the obesity causing all these problems, could be fairly simply averted by switching up the ratio of fat to carbs in our diet. Just flipping it. Instead of high carb, low fat, slowly, gradually, so our body can adjust to it, switching to low carb, high fat. Really good stuff. Rewinding.
Jimmy Moore runs the hugely successful Livin' La Vida Low Carb blog. In his presentation, he described his momentous decision in January 2004 to lose the weight that was literally killing him. At age 32 and weighing 410 pounds, 185 kilograms, he began eating LCHF. Within a year, he had lost 180 pounds, 82 kilograms, shrunk his waist by 20 inches, 50 centimeters, and dropped his shirt size from 5XL to XL. Moore started his blog and related podcast in response to a flood of requests from family and friends for help and information. He is open about his battles to stay at a healthy weight and the new approaches he has tried. Feedback from the conference was generally positive. Many doctors and dietitians who attended said that the compelling science that the speakers presented was a game-changer. The barbs that did come were from the few LCHF critics in attendance. One was Jacques Rousseau, a lecturer at the UCT Faculty of Commerce. I make a detour here to talk about Rousseau because of his family background, active opposition to LCHF, and what appears to be his family's unhealthy obsession with Noakes. Rousseau is not a scientist and has no formal qualification in nutrition. He has been a junior lecturer on critical thinking and ethics at UCT for 18 years, and with just an honours degree in philosophy and a master's in English. Rousseau, spelt Rousseau, Rousseau's father is Professor Jacques Rousseau, spelt Rossouw, a UCT graduate who works for the US National Institutes of Health, NIH. Rousseau Sr. was an influential figure in the medical establishment in South Africa until he left his young family behind to pursue other more attractive opportunities in the US. Once Noakes experienced his Damascene moment in 2010, Rousseau Sr. became one of his fiercest critics. I first became aware of Rousseau Jr. in 2014. By then he had written 15 articles on his personal blog, Synapses, attacking Noakes in inflammatory, often defamatory language. That number has since risen to over 35. I can probably count myself lucky that Rousseau has devoted only one nasty post to me, and then only after I started writing about Noakes. It wasn't long before Rousseau began backpedaling, along with other LCHF opponents, in the face of the evidence. He now claims that he always said that Noakes could be right. He also claims never to have accused Noakes of bad science. Yet in his blog post from 2013 titled Lessons in Bad Science, Tim Noakes and the SAMJ, he did just that. 3 days later, in a post titled More Lessons in Bad Science and Reasoning from Noakes, Rousseau again accused Noakes of willingly ignoring the basic principles of good science. Rousseau's critics on social media at times questioned why he did not declare his significant conflict of interest, who his father is, when attacking Noakes. They also challenged him on why he spells his name differently from his father, as that helped to disguise the connection. I asked him about that via email and found his explanation naive at best. He claimed that he changed his name legally 25 years ago because he did not want anyone to link him to the country's then-ruling National Party, the architects of the apartheid regime that made South Africa the pariah of the world. I wondered if Rousseau genuinely believed that people automatically assumed that anyone with an Afrikaans name was a supporter of the apartheid regime. Rousseau also does not act alone. His wife, Dr. Senior Rousseau, is an academic in the same commerce faculty at UCT and also has no training in nutrition. She has a doctorate in film and media. She has occasionally taken gratuitous swipes at Noakes using her academic position. In 2015, for example, she wrote an article in the journal Food, Culture and Society titled The Celebrity Quick Fix, When Good Food Meets Bad Science. No prizes for guessing who she thinks is practicing bad science. In the article, Senior parrots much of what her husband says about Noakes. She invokes the same straw man arguments, claiming that Noakes only has anecdotal evidence to buttress his advocacy of LCHF. Husband and wife appear oblivious of the extensive body of research in both the scientific and popular literature supporting LCHF for specific medical conditions. Rousseau also appeared not to understand much of the scientific evidence presented at the Cape Town conference. He made much about the fact that some speakers preferred to talk of a healthy fat rather than a high-fat diet, as if he thought that Noakes promotes a high intake of unhealthy fats. Like other critics of the summit, Rousseau seemed keen to dismiss it as an LCHF echo chamber. It was anything but. Speakers agreed on some major points of LCHF theory and disagreed on others. They differed in how low in terms of carbohydrates LCHF diets must go for maximum benefit. All agreed, however, that LCHF is not a fad diet. The real fad, they said, is the official low-fat, high-carb diet prescribed by the official guidelines for decades. None of the speakers said that LCHF is a one-size-fits-all diet. Some differences turned out to be little more than semantics. Harcum said that she does not call the nutrition advice she advocates LCHF. However, when people eat real food, unprocessed, unadulterated food that is as close to its natural state as possible, they tend to eat LCHF, she said. The only summit criticism that stood up to any scrutiny was a lack of question time. That was mostly a function of speakers having so much science to present and contextualize. The speakers made up for it, however, by making themselves available during breaks and over lunchtime to answer questions. The conference produced a consensus statement, which all speakers signed, except for Taubes, who had engagements and left early. As a parting comment, he said that the summit gave validity to those attending, a platform to entertain the idea that something they may have believed all along was wrong and that there is a better way of doing it. The consensus statement read, "The mainstream dietary advice that we are currently giving to the world has simply not worked. Instead, it is the opinion of the speakers at this summit that this incorrect nutritional advice is the immediate cause of the global obesity and diabetes epidemics. This advice has failed because it completely ignores the history of why and how human nutrition has developed over the past 3 million years. More importantly, it refuses to acknowledge the presence of insulin resistance, carbohydrate intolerance, as the single most prevalent biological state in modern humans. Persons with insulin resistance are at an increased risk of developing a wide range of chronic medical conditions if they ingest a high-carbohydrate diet for any length of time, decades." Noakes closed the summit on 22 February 2015 with a powerful presentation titled "The Way Forward." It was a compelling mix of the personal, professional and scientific. In it, Noakes showed who he thinks is really practicing junk science and endangering people's health. He also identified a major obstacle. "The key problem," he said, "is that both sides believe the facts sit with them. Either they are right or I am right. We can't both be right." The right thing, Noakes said, is for scientists to look not just at all the evidence, but especially the quality of the evidence. That's good science, according to the rules laid down by the late Sir Austin Bradford Hill, the man revered as the father of medical statistics. Scientists who choose to ignore the robust evidence that disputes their theories are not practicing good science, as Noakes showed. Since Bradford Hill's death in 1991, many researchers have ignored his criteria and flipped into a model of junk science, he said. These scientists are more interested in getting funding and more work, not making people healthier. They have dropped the bar to the lowest level of performance achieved in a cross-sectional, associational study. This allows them to prove just about anything to cause something. It demonstrates a move from hard science to junk science, he said. "We have generated a whole discipline of nutritional science ignoring Bradford Hill's criteria," said Noakes, "and we wonder why we have got it all so very wrong." He quoted the late great British physicist Stephen Hawking, who was always clear on what to do if the facts don't fit the theory. "Abandon the theory." Noakes quoted from Hawking's book, In Black Holes and Baby Universes and Other Essays. In practice, people are very reluctant to give up a theory in which they have invested a lot of time and effort. They usually start by questioning the accuracy of the observations. If that fails, they try to modify the theory in an ad hoc manner. Eventually, the theory becomes a creaking and ugly edifice. Then someone suggests a new theory in which all the awkward observations are explained in an elegant and natural manner. The Cape Town Conference had exposed the creaking, ugly edifice of conventional wisdom on nutrition and had explained an alternative in an elegant and natural manner, he said. "We have two choices," Noakes said in closing. "We can continue to ignore the evidence presented at this summit and go on blaming the obese and diabetic for their sloth and gluttony, that is supposedly the sole cause of their obesity and diabetes. Or if we are ever to reverse this epidemic that has become the greatest modern threat to human health, we need to admit that we have been wrong for the past 40 years and must now change." Experts, Noakes said, can continue to apply a failed model to a growing global health crisis in the utterly irrational hope that what has not worked in the past will suddenly miraculously produce a different result. That, in a quote attributed to Einstein, is the true marker of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Noakes offered an alternative. If we have the individual and collective courage, we can acknowledge our insanity, admit our errors, and start the healing process by adopting the solutions presented by the speakers at this summit. Our greatest hope is that this summit will serve as the global tipping point for the final acceptance that what we have prescribed and practiced as healthy nutrition for the past 40 years is not only not based on any good science, but tragically has been profoundly damaging to human health on a global scale. He ended his presentation with a quote from Professor Christian Barnard. "I have saved the lives of 150 people through heart transplantations. If I had focused on preventative medicine earlier, I would have saved 150 million people." Noakes said that it was his hope that Barnard, the man who gave South Africa its greatest medical moment in history, would have his wish posthumously. That is, to bring health and healing to billions of humans through the provision of dietary advice that is appropriate because it is scientifically based. It understands the biological consequences of our human evolution. It recognizes the widespread presence of insulin resistance in most populations across the globe. At that, the assembled delegates and speakers from around the world gave Tim Noakes a lengthy standing ovation. And as Harcombe later noted, there was hardly a dry eye left in the house. The summit augured well as a curtain raiser for the coming drama of his trial.
So I'm just going to let that speak for itself. I think we all deserve to get this book or play this back and share it with friends, whatever it takes to help shift the perception of what constitutes health from our macronutrient level of what we take in every day. So with that, I'll let you guys go. Hope this has been helpful to you and nourishing. Till the next eye opener. I love you all. Take care.